just about to embark on another installment of our Precepts and Principles in the Torah series, and we have been covering Yahweh's calendar and the Passover observance here the last several weeks, and trying to grab what we can as far as what we need to learn in terms of what this is all about. And we covered on our first segment the Yahweh's calendar and when it begins and when we can determine a new month. We also went into the precepts, understanding and applying Passover. And then last week we covered Passover in the New Covenant. And now, this week, we are going to cover the Passover service as part of our study series. And a lot of interesting ways of applying and bringing Yahushua into the Passover service written in the Torah. And that certainly seemed to be Yahweh's expectation that it would be done that way. So, for that reason, we are going to see and discover the awesome ways in which partaking of the body and blood of Messiah as our Passover lamb does indeed fit quite well with the Passover service that Yahweh instituted for Yisrael in ancient times there in the Torah. Now, for those of you who are needing to know what the Passover dates are this year, if you are like me and I go according to when I see the new moon here in the United States, I'm calling it a month. I'm not going to pretend like the crescent moon doesn't exist. I'm not going to look up in the sky and say there it is and then wait a day. That's when I think a new month is. And so now those who are going by what we see in what was seen in Jerusalem, they're going to keep it a day later than these dates, because apparently it was not seen on this night of the 12th here like I saw it. But I saw it, and actually my daughter Leanna was the first one to notice the new moon in the sky. We prayed for the clouds to part because it was sort of cloudy, and Yahweh answered our prayer, and we got a good picture there of the new moon. So we praise Yahweh for that. Anyway, so this being the first day of the new year on the 13th, we fast forward to the 14th day, and we got the first day, second day, third day, fourth, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th. So this is the day of Passover, what's called the 26th of March. And then that night is when my family and I will be partaking of the Passover lamb that was killed for us on the 9th hour of the 26th there, 9th hour of the day. And so as nightfall begins, it has to be at night, we will begin partaking of the lamb. We got some brothers here locally, some families that are going to join us. And on this 27th right here is the first day of the feast. And then the second is the last day of the feast. And those are our holy days. So we keep those as Sabbaths, except we may cook on those days, as we will see. So, all right. So this is the text that we came to as we were going through principles and precepts in the Torah. It says 3 times in the year all males shall appear before the Master Yahweh. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread, nor shall the fat of my sacrifice remain until morning. And we see leavened bread representing sin. We would not do that. We keep unleavened bread. Yahshua was our unleavened sacrifice, and his body did not remain on the tree until morning. So the principles are still being applied here when we're talking about observing Yahweh's law. And so I want to go over some of the main principles we've covered so far. We are Yisrael according to the Scriptures, Ephesians 2, Romans 11, Galatians 3. We were in bondage to Pharaoh, or Satan, is symbolically speaking there. Yahweh demonstrated his superiority over the idols of this world. That's Egypt. We were offered grace and deliverance, just as Israel was offered grace and deliverance from bondage. They set aside the lamb on Aviv 10. That's when our lamb was also. And the lamb was offered on Passover day. Our lamb, Yeshua Messiah, was offered on Passover day. And we went into some additional principles. Looks like we doubled that one up for some reason. But Messiah is our Passover according to 1 Corinthians 5:7. Partaking of him is partaking of Passover. So when do you do it? Obviously around the time of Passover. We must examine ourselves before partaking of him. A very important element there, 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Eat a regular meal before partaking of the Messiah. According to 1 Corinthians 11:34, it says, eat your meals at home. When you come together, though, let's partake of the Master's supper, the Master's body and blood. So the bread must be unleavened bread. The bread represents the Word. The fruit of the vine represents the Messiah's blood, his sacrifice for us. Okay, so that's a real brief overview of what we've covered here already in the last few weeks. And so where we go from here, we're going to take a look at Exodus 12 as we are going through this entire chapter and extracting all the principles that we can find out of it, and see how all of this really relates to us in a powerful way as we go through this chapter. It says, this month shall be your beginning of months, as we shared earlier a few weeks ago on Yahweh's calendar. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th day of this month every man shall take for himself a lamb according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And of course, Yahshua, the Messiah, was selected on the 10th day of that month. And then if the household is too small for a lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of persons. According to each man's need, you shall make your account for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish. And Yahshua definitely is the lamb without blemish. A male of the first year, you may take it from the sheep or from the goats. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it. Now the New King James Version here has twilight, but we understand that's between the evenings there, ben ha'arbayim in the Hebrew. And I would understand that as being the 9th hour of the day, the exact hour Yahshua became our Passover lamb. And in fact, the whole reason he told them to kill the lamb at that time, because he knew Yahweh would be sending Yahshua to die for our sins at that exact time. So, and they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts on the lintel of the houses where they eat it. So we want the blood on the doorpost of our heart, and that is the door in which Messiah does enter. Then they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire with unleavened bread, and with, and here's our first principle of this study, bitter herbs. Bitter herbs shall they eat it. What about us? Should we partake of Messiah with bitter herbs? I think so. Yeah, a lot of people don't notice that, but some people use parsley when they do it. But looking here, okay, examining ourselves before we were taking of him. We eat a regular meal before partaking of Messiah. Bread must be unleavened. Bread representing the Word, fruit of the vine, Messiah's sacrifice. And then finally, partaking of this with bitter herbs, or we're going to find here, is actually the herb myrrh. And, all right. Do not eat it raw, nor boiled at all with water, but roasted in fire, its head, its legs, its entrails. Let none of it remain until morning. Actually, we're going to skip this verse. And I should have the, I guess I don't have the Hebrew up there for some reason. Okay. Well, the Hebrew, if you look up the Hebrew word for bitter, the Hebrew word for bitter is rooted in the same Hebrew word as the word for myrrh. And so when we partake of the bitter herb, some people use parsley or horseradish, but what I can gather is it should be myrrh. In fact, the word bitter, morar, is in the word myrrh is more in Hebrew. They are basically from the same root family, and so in an effort to really get to as close to Scripture as we possibly can, go down to the health food store and get you some myrrh, or order some on the internet, and let that be your bitter herb, and you'll find, it's bitter. It has kind of nice, somewhat nice taste to it, but it's pretty bitter. And it depends on what you get too. A lot of it is, you have to get these little flakes of it that people use for incense. But that's, it's myrrh. It'd be nice to have some fresh growing myrrh in the house, but I don't have that. But we keep this every year, and depending on what kind you get, it can be. You never tasted bitter until you've tasted the myrrh. But all right, and other people though they seem to like it. So, but that's one of the things that we want to do is partake of Messiah with the bitter herbs, and of course, the Egyptians they made the children of Israel serve with rigor, Exodus 1:13, and he made their lives bitter with hard bondage. And so when we partake of that bitter herb, we're remembering the bitterness and the ugliness of our former life, that when we were in Egypt, when we were in the world. And also this little feeling inside, okay, we're partaking of Messiah, but there's something inside of us saying, look what Messiah did for me. And a feeling inside of regret, for the things that we have done, where we embittered ourselves, and we embittered the Messiah through through the offering he offered for us. So, it's one of those things where we can completely relate to it. We also had to serve the enemy with rigor, and so all right. It says, "Do not eat it raw, nor boil with all with water, but roast it in fire, with its legs and its entrails." And so we understand Messiah. He went through the fiery trial, right? He was brought through the fire, and he came out completely pure. There was no impurities in him at all. It says, "And you shall let none of it remain until morning, and what remains of it till morning you shall burn with fire." We know Messiah did not remain until morning. He was taken down from the tree before sundown. "And thus you shall eat it, with a belt on your waist, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand, so you shall eat it in haste. It is Yahweh's Passover." The lamb itself is the Passover. And so when we're partaking of him, it says here, eat it in haste as Yahweh's Passover. And so we want to eat the lamb when we're partaking of the Passover, which he is our Passover. It says, you shall eat it in haste. Eat it quickly. So when I'm partaking of the unleavened bread representing the body, and the fruit of the vine representing the blood, I do it quickly. I'm trying to follow the principle here. Eat it in haste. And so we do it quickly. We quickly want to receive the Messiah, Yahshua. We quickly want to turn our hearts to him and have him a part of us. We quickly want him to forgive us of our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And so we quickly want to leave Egypt. And so we eat it in haste. And it says, that we're to eat that with with a staff in our hand, and with a belt on our waist, the sandals on our feet, and a staff in our hand. Well, what is that? Well, we go out in the woods here, and we actually get a staff, and we have it in our hand. And I even went to the store a few years ago and bought me some sandals. I didn't have any sandals. And I get my belt, which I don't normally wear a belt, but I get a belt around my waist, and I'm ready. I'm ready to leave the world, ready to leave Egypt and go to the promised land. And so we eat that in haste, with a belt on our waist, sandals on our feet, and staff in our hand, ready to go. How about you? And that's part of the object lesson that we are displaying or participating in. And some think, well, that's just going too far. You don't have to do all that. Well, he said to do it. So, just like he said, that our baptism going down into the water is an object lesson of what's happening inside. In the same way, this belt on our waist, the sandals on our feet, the staff is what's happening inside, is a reasoning and a resolve within our hearts to depart from Egypt and to have nothing to do with it, and to have the word of Yahweh before us and all the world and all its yuck behind us. Just as when we go down into the baptismal waters, the old man is dead, the new man rises up, and we are ready. We're ready to go. We are now a new man. And this is all object lessons for us and for our children. We show them. We don't want anything to do with the old life. We don't want to be adulterers and adulteresses and be friendship with the world. That's with enmity with Yahweh. We're walking away from this junk that the world has to offer. And now we are following the cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night. As we enter that Red Sea, that baptismal waters, we begin that journey where on this journey, Yahweh is instructing us in the Torah, writing the Torah in our hearts. And it's a man named Yahshua who will take us across the Jordan. Yahshua says, let your waist be girded. Get the belt around it, and your lamps burning. Luke 12:35. And you yourselves be like men who wait for their master when he will return from the wedding, that when he comes and knocks, they may open to him immediately. So he's saying, be ready. Waist girded, lamps burning. Almost a Passover-like illustration here. When the Messiah returns, are we ready? Will we be among the ones who are destroyed? And I've wondered about this. When Messiah returns, it appears that there will be some who are on the earth who are going to be reigning over. But how will he decide who is going to be killed? And how will he decide who will not be killed? Because there's some left, some will be taken, others will be left. Obviously, us who the corruptible puts on incorruptible, we are believers in Messiah. He will not take us. But I'm going to teach this as doctrine, but just something to think about, that possibly when Messiah returns, it's the firstborn he's going to destroy, and the remainder will be allowed to live. And so, anyway, just a thought. But let your waist be girded, your lamps burning, be ready, and maybe he'll return at Passover. I don't know, but we need to be ready. Therefore, in another place, girding up the loins, it says, 1 Peter 1:13, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and rest your hope fully upon the grace that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Yahshua the Messiah. As obedient children, not conforming yourselves to the former lusts, as in your ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, because it is written, be holy, for I am holy. So we, in a spiritual sense, especially on Passover, as you gird up the belt around your waist, make sure you do that with your mind also. It Stand therefore, Ephesians 6:14, having girded your waist with truth. We need to have truth. Having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the good news of peace. And so that's our sandals. We've got good news with us as we travel toward the promised land. We've got our feet shod with the preparation of the good news and peace, as it says in Isaiah 52:7, how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who proclaims peace, who brings glad tidings of good things, who proclaims salvation, who says to Zion, your Elohim reigns. Hallelujah. And so we can relate to these things. And what about the staff in our hand? Well, Scripture says here, Matthew 10:38, he who does not take we shared a couple of weeks ago about it's not really a cross, it's a stake, it's an upright pole. Take his stake and follow after me is not worthy of me. So we, just as ancient Israel were taking their staff and they're making their trek toward the promised land, Yeshua says we need to take our staff, our stake, and we need to follow him wherever he leads us, wherever the cloud takes us, or the Spirit leads us, we need to go. And if we don't do that, we're not worthy of it. So, another place, Matthew 16:24, Yeshua said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his stake, his staros in the Greek, his stake, and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? Again, very salvational. We need to follow the Lamb wherever he leads us. And when he sent out the 12, he called the 12 to himself and began to send them out 2 by 2. And he gave them power over unclean spirits. He commanded them to take nothing for the journey except what? Staff. No brag, no bread, no copper for the money belts, but to wear sandals and to not put on 2 tunics. And we are being sent out also as presenters and messengers for the good news. We have good news to share. And so as we're on this journey through the wilderness, through this land between, this land that's not our own, we manifest the hope that is in us, the Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach. And so we are on that journey, just as they were on that journey. All right, so this day shall be to you as a memorial, Exodus 12:14, and you shall keep it as a feast to Yahweh throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. And so this is our journey. This is our promised land journey. And this night is a memorial. This is a memorial supper. And Yeshua said, he took bread, he gave thanks and broke it. He gave it to them. He said, this is my body which is given for you. Do this in remembrance. So this is a memorial also, this thing that Yeshua has instructed us to do. This is all part of a memorial. And so as far as the things are concerned with Passover, we have to keep that in mind. This is a memorial of what Messiah did for us in our exodus from Egypt. So adding to our principles for Passover service, I want you to notice it says to give thanks for the bread. When we look at what Messiah was doing, he said, he took bread, he gave thanks, and he broke it. So before you partake of the Messiah at Passover, make sure you give thanks for the body of Messiah. So that's part of our principles for our Passover service, is that you give thanks for the bread, which Yeshua is the bread. So this is a memorial. And another principle we can pull from that verse is don't slice the bread ahead of time. Break it after the prayer and then distribute it. So you break it after the prayer because you're going to say, this is Messiah's body which was broken for us. And so at that time you break the bread. And if you look back in the verse, that's exactly what Yeshua did. He said he gave thanks for it and then he broke it. So we're trying to follow his pattern. He says, do this in remembrance of me. This is all part of it. Giving thanks, breaking the bread, and remembering his body, which was given for us. And other Gospels say was broken for us. And so those are the principles that we can apply to our Passover service. All right. Exodus 12:14. So this day shall be to you a memorial. You shall keep it as a feast to Yahweh throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. So on the first day we make sure we have all the leavening out of our houses. We're going to get to that in a minute. And it says, on the first day there shall be a holy convocation. On the 7th day there shall be a holy convocation for you. No manner of work shall be done on them, but that which every one must eat, that only may be prepared by you. And so this is a holy day. It's one of the 7 holy days in Scripture. And the first day, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, is the first holy day of the year. That's a festival. And then the 7th day is also a holy day. And he says, have a Mikra Kodesh, a holy convocation, should be done. That means a gathering, a holy gathering for the purposes of reading. And the word convocation has to do with the reading Scripture, the calling out of Scripture. It says, no manner of work shall be done on them. And this is not a normal Sabbath, but it's called a Sabbath in which no servile work should be done, as we'll see later. But it says, but that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared by you, which we're getting the indication here that we are permitted to prepare food on a day, the first day of unleavened bread and the last day of unleavened bread. No manner of work shall be done on them. So both days are days which we may prepare food. So you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on the same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. It's something that is always to be observed this day. So we don't do any work on those days except for work related to the meal preparations. That would be the only exception. So adding to our principles for Passover service, make sure that we cease from work on the 1st and 7th days of the feast. We don't do any work except for the preparation of food. That's where the exception is given. All right. So continuing on here in our journey through Exodus 12, it says in verse 18, it says, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. All right. So what is this? Why is he saying at evening on the 14th day, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day at evening? Well, first of all, let's add this to our principles here. Eat no unleavened bread. Eat no leavened bread during the 7 days of the feast. So your bread should be without yeast, at a minimum, and there are some yeast substitutes, which we'll get into. But it says, eat no leavened bread during the 7 days of the festival. And, all right. Now it says, specifically, let's back it up here. It says, on the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening. On the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. Now, that can be a little confusing. But let's take a look here at a calendar, as we were sharing earlier. This is the first day of the first month, the 13th. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. That's when 10th of Aviv is. 11th, 12th, 13th. And then here we have the 14th day of Aviv. Now, when the 14th day is here, it's already the 14th day. It says, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread. So here we are at the 14th day of the month. And so when evening time takes place, at evening, you shall eat no leavened bread. Unleavened bread only. And so he's specifying for them when a day begins. He's specifying for them when a day begins. And I'll explain that to you even further here in a minute. Because the time in which we're actually supposed to partake of unleavened bread starts on the night of the 26th, and it continues on through the week. Get into the next month here. Oh yeah, I forgot I did this for you. This is actually the days of the month. If we were to transition from the Passover, the Roman calendar, and the Passover of Yahweh's calendar, here we have the first day matching up with the 13th day of Yahweh's calendar. And so we're going to start here on the night of the 14th at evening, which is actually the beginning of the 15th. We continue on. We eat no leavened bread until 21st day of the month at evening. Then we can start eating leavened bread again. And so that makes perfect sense in light of some other scriptures. In Leviticus 23 verse 5, it says, on the 14th day of the first month at between the evenings is Yahweh's Passover, and on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to Yahweh. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. So starting on this 15th day, 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it, but you shall offer an offering made by fire to Yahweh for 7 days. The 7th day shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it. And so our diagram here lines up pretty well. When it's the 14th day of the month, you're sitting in your house, you look out, you see the sun go down, it's evening now. That begins our 7 days of unleavened bread, the first day of unleavened bread being this 15th of Aviv right here. And so there you have it. And there are some who combine the 14th and 15th day, but I don't see how you can get that, because he's making a distinction. On the 14th day of the first month is Yahweh's Passover. The 15th day is a Feast of Unleavened Bread. So there's a distinction made between the 14th and the 15th. So here we are. This is Yahweh's Passover. On the 15th day is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. 14th day is the day of Passover. And the final day, 7 days later, we have the final day, the 7th day of unleavened bread, which is what we see here. All right. Now in the first month, on the 14th day of the month that evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month that evening. For 7 days, it says, no leaven shall be found in, sorry for the streak there, in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened. Nothing leavened. In all your dwellings you shall eat unleavened bread. So don't even have it in your house at all. So adding to our principles for Passover service, no leavening is to be found in our dwelling places, and it's not just the house, it's our property, and other verses will clarify. But so we need to get rid of anything that might contain leavening. Now, in ancient Israel, it was a lot simpler than we have today. They didn't have all this boxed food from Walmart with the ingredient labels and ingredient lists, everything being pre-made for you. They made their own food from scratch. That's just how it was. But what exactly is leavening? In Exodus 12:15, it says, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. For the first day you shall remove leaven. And that's the Hebrew word 7603. From your houses, for whoever eats what's leavened. And then a different word is used, 25:57. Bread from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. So you must remove the leaven from our dwelling places. Well, the first word, 7603, we looked that up in a lexicon, seor, just means leaven. Well, it doesn't give us much of a more detailed description, but notice it says it's from 7604, and so we look into the root, seor, it's from sha'ar, and what it means is to remain, to be left over, to be left behind. To be left over, to left alive, to survive, to be left behind. And so it has to do with this remnant. That's what's left over. The leftovers. And some are thinking, I get rid of my leftovers by Passover. Well, let's look more deeply here. The second word, 2557, is what's translated leavened. And it's from chametz, actually. And it has the thing leavened or leaven. Okay, there's no more detailed description here. What's from 2556, and we look at the root word here, and chametz, in this case, to be leavened or be sour. To be leavened, to taste something leavened, to be embittered, grieved, to be cruel, oppressed, be ruthless, to be red. All right. We see it's translated leavened 5 times, cruel 1 time, died once, and grieved another time. So we look in the other scriptures here, and it says, deliver me, O my Elohim, out of the hand of the wicked, out of the hand of the unrighteous and cruel man. The word translated cruel is chametz. Chametz, whatever. And then Psalm 73:21, thus my heart was grieved. The word translated grieved is chametz again. And I was vexed in my mind. And so what's going on here? What is this? How do we line all these up with meaning leavening? Well, the Hebrew words have to do with the way in which bread was leavened in ancient times. I mean, they didn't go down to the Walmart and buy a packet of yeast for a few dollars. They had to get the leavening is always in the air. The yeast is always in the air. And you give it some nice bread to go munch on. It's gonna eat that bread, and that's the byproduct of that is what creates the leavening of the bread. And the more sugars you have in the bread, the more it's likely to rise because it feeds off the sugars. All right, so but they didn't just throw a package of yeast in. What they had to do is they had to take the remnant. So let's say you had a dough ball this big around, you take a little portion of that, of the remnant, You take the remnant, and then you save it. And you just kind of let it set out for a really long time. And eventually that little dough ball will become full of leavening. And the taste will have a sour taste to it. And so the literal meaning is a dough ball, a sour dough ball, which of course is used. They take that dough ball, and rather than waiting for that bread to rise through a longer process, they take that dough ball and they put that dough ball next to any future balls of flour. And because there's so much yeast already in that sourdough ball, it immediately would go into the other dough ball, and so that would rise a lot faster. And so basically in ancient Israel, the only thing they had to do was make sure there weren't any breadcrumbs all over the floor, and take the sourdough ball and toss it or burn it or whatever. Real easy for them. And I know of at least one family who they actually leaven their bread that way. They don't take that dough ball. It takes a little longer, but the resulting bread does have more of a sour taste to it than the bread you might buy at the store. So, but today we have more sophisticated ways of collecting yeast and more ways to cause bread to rise than with just yeast alone. In fact, a person could keep the festival of unleavened bread and continue to bake breads that rise just like it does with yeast, and really not have any bread that's you would even know is unleavened. The alternative methods would typically be baking soda or baking powder. Those are the most common, but there are also other agents that would be used in place of yeast, which are pretty common. Now, some might say, well, only if we have the sourdough ball do we need to toss it. Well, if we don't have a sourdough ball, then we're okay. If you want to go by the rigid, mechanical, looking for a loophole in the law kind of method of looking at Yahweh's law, then okay, that's what you do. But our goal is to find the principles and precepts. The principles is what we're after the most, out of the precepts of Yahweh's law. And so I want to get rid of not just yeast and bread that contains yeast, or any items that may have already gotten leavened bread that's in my house. But I want to follow the principles, and I don't want to try to find some loophole in the law and back to the Jews. Some of them, they'll sell their house to a Gentile for $1. That way they don't have to get rid of the leavening in it. They don't own it anymore. And then they buy it back after the week is over, and they think that they're okay. They haven't done anything to try to get rid of leavening, and they think that they're okay by that. But that's not following the principles in Yahweh's law. That's looking for some way of treating it as some rigid legal code. I just don't agree with that way of doing it. So what we want to do is try to find what are some alternative leavening agents that might be found in the food that we buy. And as the world becomes more and more away from Yahweh, the more complicated our lives are, the more challenging it can become to get rid of the leavening. And the same is true, the more complicated we are and the more further this world is away from Yahweh, the more challenging it can become to get rid of the sin that's in our lives. And so there's a application here for this. All right, so what are the leavening agents? Well, if you just want to go with the big ones, you'd say yeast, baking soda, and unleavened bread. But if you're like me, you want to try to be more diligent and get rid of all possible leavening agents. Rather than reading here on the broadcast, I will just point you to this particular web page where I have a list of leavening agents. And in this list, there's quite a bit, and most of what's on that list you will never find in anything. A lot of it's used at restaurants, by bakers, and so on, but there is still a possibility that you might. And so for that reason, you want to do your best to try to get rid of anything. And I know it can be tedious, but remember, this is an exercise. This is an exercise of getting rid of the sin that's in our lives. And so we want to get rid of sin, right? We want to get rid of all sin. And so this is an exercise of the diligence with which we want to rid ourselves of sin. And so please don't think that, by doing this, I'm trying to be what's called legalistic or whatever. That's not my intent. My intent is to practice to the best of my understanding what Yahweh wants me to practice. And so for that reason, actually got a broken graphic on that page, which if you reload the page, if you happen to be there now, I have fixed that broken graphic. But there's going to be a kosher for Passover symbol on a lot of the products, kind of help you weed through all the ingredients and such. But you'll find that there's going to be some ingredients that may be in there. So you want to get rid of those things because we want to, with this kind of diligence, rid our lives of the sin that's there. So, also, how do we make unleavened bread? A lot of people are wondering about that. Well, here's the unleavened bread recipe, and that's also linked from the website. If you go to EliYah.com/Passover.html, you will see there's the Passover study on the main page, a link to this recipe. And so that's how you can make unleavened bread. I don't make it fancy. I don't add things to it. Some people might want to add salt, because every offering was supposed to be offered with salt. That's up to you whether you want to include salt. But this is a representation of the Messiah's body. So there we go. And you can find this recipe on this particular web address, EliYah.com/PassoverService.html. And if you're getting a little confused as to trying to remember all the things we're supposed to do, this particular web page will take you step by step through a Passover service that, from my understanding, is as close to what's biblical and maybe not so fond of what's traditional. And I'm not against tradition. I'm not saying all tradition's bad. In fact, I know maybe the Afikoman is if you've heard of that, the Jewish part of the Jewish service is something that they hide the bread and so on. It's supposed to be representing the Messiah, but I don't know. I just want. This is such a solemn occasion. This is such a serious matter. I want to be careful that I am doing everything exactly according to what's written in Scripture, bringing Messiah into the Passover observance as our Passover lamb, and not adding much at all. The particular traditions. The Jewish Passover actually they use an egg there on the. What's an egg doing on the dinner plate? Why it's there is beyond me. So the only thing I can think of is maybe some Christians imposed something on them in their history, and they found a way to justify it, with the Easter eggs and so on, and the pagan things that they were involved in. And so I don't necessarily trust all the Jewish traditions any more than I would trust Christian traditions such as Christmas and Easter and so on. So our goal, at least my goal, is, and I'm not saying I'm there, I'm not saying I've arrived, I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I want to get as close to the biblical observance as I can. All right, continuing here. And Moshe called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, pick out and take lambs for yourselves according to your families and kill the Passover. Once again, the lamb itself is called the Passover. And of course, Messiah is called our Passover in 1 Corinthians 5:7. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the bloods in the basin, strike the lintel and the 2 doorposts with the bloods in the basin, and none of you shall go out the door of his house until morning. For Yahweh will pass through to strike the Egyptians. He didn't want them to end up getting killed. They had to be within the threshold. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, Yahweh will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to strike you. And you shall observe this thing as an ordinance for you and for your sons forever. It will come to pass when you come into the land which Yahweh will give you, just as he promised, that you shall keep this service. And that's for that reason. I get the staff in hand, sandals on my feet, whole 9 yards. And it shall be when your children say to you, what do you mean by this service? That you shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice of Yahweh, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians and delivered our households. So the people bowed their heads and worshipped. So, what do we do as part of our Passover service? I guess I didn't write this down, but we do want to have this, have our children ask us what this means. And we explain, it is the Passover sacrifice of Yahweh, who passes over us and saves us by the blood of the Lamb, just as he struck the Egyptians but saved Israel. And so we make that as part of the Passover service on that webpage I gave you earlier, that the children have the opportunity to ask the adults what that means. And a lot of these things, is all about calling our children back, and the festivals. And I know that a lot of us would tell what our experiences are with our children that, even if they depart from the faith later in life, they typically look back at the festivals of Yahweh as something they really enjoyed, and that they probably miss. And so these are object lessons. And we saw earlier during our scripture reading that the festivals a lot of times accompanied the turning of the people back to Yahweh again. They would keep these festivals, and with great joy they would keep these festivals. And that's what they're there for, is for the generations to come, to remember the awesome works of Yahweh and the Messiah and what he's done for us. That's what it's all about. He wants Israel to remember. And the children of Israel went away and did so, just as Yahweh commanded Moshe and Aaron. Aharon says in Hebrew, it's Aaron. So they did, and it came to pass at midnight that Yahweh struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of livestock. So Pharaoh arose in the night, he, all his servants, all Egyptians. There was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. Then he called for Moshe and Aaron by night. So there they were. It said, rise, go out from among my people, both you and the children of Israel, and go serve Yahweh as you have said. Also take your flocks and your herds as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also. And the Egyptians urged the people that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, we shall all be dead. Then he called for Moshe. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, having their kneading bowls bound up on their clothes, on their shoulders. They used their garments to carry things. this case the kneading bowl. And even some of the Bedouins and different Arabs, they'll have these garments also. Like remember, I think it was Ruth that carried some grain in her clothes. And anyway, so now the children of Israel had done according to the word of Moshe, and they had asked from the Egyptians articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing. And Yahweh had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they granted them what they requested. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. And so the Egyptians were plundered because Yahweh had fought this battle. And likewise, it says the enemies of Yahweh were plundered when Yahshua died for our sins. It says he disarmed, Colossians 2:15, disarmed principalities and powers and made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in it. And so, now the word translated disarmed there it literally means to strip away what belongs to somebody else. And so the same way Messiah stripped away, which the kingdom of this world was, Satan was the ruler of this world, now Yahshua is the ruler. He disarmed the principalities and powers and made a public spectacle of them. He triumphed over them through his work when he died on the tree. So likewise, they plundered the Egyptians. Yahshua plunders the Egyptians, the worldly powers. Exodus 12:37, then the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides children. A mixed multitude went up with them also. A mixed multitude went up with them also, and flocks and herds, a great deal of livestock. I find that interesting because it wasn't just Israel that made the Exodus. There were also Gentiles that went with them. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough which they had brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were driven out of Egypt and could not wait, nor had they prepared provisions for themselves. It was not even enough time for them to leaven bread. They had to go. They had the staff in their hand, sandals on their feet. They were out the door. No time to waste. And that's the whole purpose of the unleavened bread, to show that they didn't have time to leaven bread. They had to go. They were driven out. And so they weren't quite ready, but they had to go anyway. All right, but a mixed multitude went up with them, also a mixed multitude. And likewise, the new covenant, the days are coming, says Yahweh, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Who is the new covenant with? A lot of people say, well, we're a New Testament church. We're not to do with that Old Testament stuff. That's with Israel. This is with us. We're Gentiles. But we see here, as I share often, the new covenant is with the same people. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers. But in spite of this covenant being made with Israel and with Judah, there's still a mixed multitude who also join into this covenant, who also will have the law of Yahweh written in their minds and written on their hearts, and will have their sins forgiven and so on. And so even though both covenants were with Israel and Judah, others are free from other nations to join in from every tribe, every nation, and every tongue, and be a part of this grand exodus from Egypt. And we all can relate to this exodus from the world. We've left it. It's gone. It's behind us. And so join in with Israel. Join in through the new covenant and start this journey toward the land of promise. All right, Exodus 12:40. So now the sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, on that very same day, it came to pass that all the armies of Yahweh went out from the land of Egypt. It is a night of solemn observance to Yahweh for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. This is that night of Yahweh, a solemn observance for all the children of Israel throughout their generations. So to the day, I presume that Jacob and his family came to Egypt around that time, not having had any successful harvest of barley or anything. It was all a big mess. So there we go. There was not enough barley in Israel, so they went. And Yahweh said to Moshe and Aharon, this is the ordinance of the Passover, no foreigner shall eat of it. But every man's servant who is bought for money, when you have circumcised him, then he may eat it. A sojourner and a hired servant shall not eat it. In one house it shall be eaten. You shall not carry any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break one of its bones. We know Yahshua did not have his bones broken. And all the congregation of Israel shall keep it. And when a stranger dwells with you and wants to keep the Passover to Yahweh, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it, for he shall be as a native of the land. For no uncircumcised person shall eat it. One law shall be for the native born, and for the stranger who dwells with you. Thus all the children of Israel did as Yahweh commanded Moshe and Aaron, so they did, and it came to pass on that very same day, Yahweh brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt according to their armies. So there we go. Now, what about us? Do we need to be circumcised? We see this here. If we're not circumcised, let all his males be circumcised before partaking of the Messiah, our Passover. Well, we do know that we are circumcised in one sense. Colossians 2:11. In him you were also circumcised with the circumcision made without hands. And so we were spiritually circumcised by putting off the body of the sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Messiah, buried with him in baptism, in which you also were raised with him through faith and the working of Elohim who raised him from the dead. So we have this circumcision of the Messiah through baptism, the putting off the body, the sins of the flesh. Now, do we need to be physically circumcised in order to partake of the body of Messiah? Well, we know the Corinthians all gathered to partake of the Messiah. And we see here that 1 Corinthians 7:18, that there were some Corinthians who were not circumcised. And he even said, was anyone called while circumcised, let him not become circumcised. Anyone called while uncircumcised, let him not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, uncircumcision is nothing, but keeping the commandments of Elohim. That's what matters. So the point is, we have to have the circumcision of the Messiah. And the Corinthian assembly, unfortunately, or I don't like to say unfortunately, but regrettably, did not have this. They did not know the commandments. They weren't keeping the commandments properly. And it's no good to get circumcised if you're not bothering to keep the commandments of Elohim. And we see this in Romans 2:25. It says, for circumcision is indeed profitable if you keep the Torah, if you keep the law. But if you're a breaker of the law, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. And looking at the mess the Corinthian assembly was in, they were not keeping Yahweh's law. Therefore, if an uncircumcised man keeps the righteous requirements of the law, will not his uncircumcision be counted as circumcision? And so he's saying that a man being circumcised of the heart is the most important thing. And the physical circumcision, if you need to partake of a physical lamb on the Passover, you would need a physical circumcision. But we see here that they were partaking of the Messiah, who is our spiritual lamb, and his focus was not on how circumcised they were in the flesh, but how circumcised they were in the heart. Because he says, therefore, whoever eats this bread or drinks this cup of the master in an unworthy manner will be guilty of the body and blood of the master. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy manner eats and drinks judgment to himself, not discerning the master's body. So we need the circumcision of the Messiah. We need to have the circumcision of the heart, before we partake of the Lamb, Yahshua the Messiah. And so what I can gather, the best of what I can get from looking at all the scriptures, do we need to be physically circumcised to partake of the physical Lamb, if that was going on in Jerusalem, which is not, if we weren't there? No, we don't. Yes, we do if it's a physical lamb. I'm sorry. But if it's the Messiah, who is, spiritually speaking, a lamb, one that you don't have to be physically clean in order to partake of, or physically circumcised, from what I can gather, that we do need to have the circumcision of the Messiah. I think baptism may fit the mold. I'm not saying you have to be baptized a certain way and the right name, but just baptized, a baptism that was fully sincere from the heart. That might be a requirement you could look into and pray about, and let the Spirit of Elohim speak to you on that. But if we are circumcised in the heart, we will get baptized. Now, there are some people, they can't get baptized for one reason or another, and I understand that. But this is one reason I encourage, if you haven't been baptized, come to our festivals, because that's one of the major things that we do. We end up baptizing quite a few people. So, but it says, let a man examine himself. So we need to have the circumcision of the Messiah, which is of the heart, which is being buried with him in baptism, which, and I think that may be at least of the heart. It's our heart's desire to get baptized at the very minimum that we need to have before partaking of him, because we don't want to partake of him in an unworthy manner. So, all right. Continuing on here. We do need to be physically clean to partake of a physical lamb. We see here Numbers 9, verse 10. It says, speak to the children of Israel, saying, if any one of you or your posterity is unclean because of a corpse, or is far away on a journey, he may still keep Yahweh's Passover on the 14th day of the second month. Again, this is between the evenings, it's twilight we're here. That they may keep it. They shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They shall leave none of it until morning, nor break one of its bones. According to all the ordinances of the Passover, they shall keep it. So you are allowed to keep the Passover during the second month if there's some reason why you're not able to during the first month. I know a few people who've had to do that. But in this case, we're talking about someone who's unclean because of a corpse. We go on to read, but the man who is clean and not on a journey, but ceases to keep the Passover, that same person shall be cut off from among his people, because he did not bring the offering of Yahweh at its appointed time. The man shall bear his sin. If a stranger dwells among you and will keep Yahweh's Passover, he must do according to the rite of the Passover and according to its ceremony. You shall have one ordinance, both for the stranger and for the native of the land. So we see here, one needs to be clean in order to observe Passover. Now, there are some people today who are teaching that we need to go out and kill a literal Passover lamb and sacrifice it, take the blood, put it on our doorposts, and partake of the physical lamb on the day of Passover. But I'm not persuaded that that is necessary. And it may be unbiblical, because most of us, when you're unclean by a corpse, everything you touch is unclean, and whoever touches that thing that's unclean becomes unclean. So the world we live in is full of uncleanness, and we're probably all defiled by reason of a corpse. So what do? We could not partake of a physical Passover lamb without the way to get cleansed is through the ashes of a red heifer. That's one of the things they're missing over there in Israel, was this red heifer, which I understand has been born now, but they can't find the red heifer. But they found a red heifer a few years ago. I don't know what the latest update is on that, but that's one of the things required for a temple to be purified. So another thing, okay, and some would say in response to that, well, look at Hezekiah. It says there were many in the assembly. Hezekiah had a Passover, 2 Chronicles 30:17, where there were many who did not sanctify themselves, and so the Levites had charge of the slaughter of the Passover lambs. Normally, the common people would slaughter it. In this case, the Levites had charge of the slaughter. And for everyone who was not clean, to sanctify them to Yahweh. For a multitude of the people, many from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun had not cleansed themselves, yet they ate the Passover. It doesn't say they slaughtered it. It says they ate it, which was contrary to what is written. And but Hezekiah prayed for them, may the good Yahweh provide atonement for everyone, for who prepares his heart to seek Elohim, Yahweh Elohim of his fathers, though he is not cleansed, according to the purification of the sanctuary. And Yahweh listened to Hezekiah and healed the people, indicating that they must have been afflicted with some kind of disease or a plague or something for not being clean while partaking of the Passover lamb, indicating they needed to be healed. So it was a pretty big deal to partake of the physical lamb and not be clean. And Yahweh in that case let it slide because they were doing the best they could at the time. But I wouldn't want to make a regular habit of that. So in my mind, taking a literal lamb isn't even possible. And if we do partake of it while being unclean, and most of us are unclean, then we're partaking of the lamb without not being sanctified. And besides, I think Yahshua, when he gave us this ordinance of partaking of his body and his blood, he knew that in 70 A.D. the temple was, that Yahweh was going to depart from that place. And there's even historical evidence that he departed from the temple. In the Jewish writings, they can't figure out why certain things weren't happening the last 40 years after Messiah died. Certain miracles, certain things, scarlet thread, turning colors, and different things. So anyway, I just think that, we need to, that Yahshua, when he gave this ordinance, he was allowing a way for us to still keep Passover no matter where we were. And so if we're away on a journey, or for whatever reason we're not near, it's still possible to keep Passover. Now the actual command is the only place we're allowed to keep Passover is the place where Yahweh chooses to put his name. It says in Deuteronomy 16 verse 1, observe the month of Aviv, and keep the Passover to Yahweh your Elohim, for in the month of Aviv Yahweh your Elohim brought you out of Egypt by night. Therefore you shall sacrifice the Passover to Yahweh your Elohim from the flock and the herd in the place where Yahweh chooses to put his name. It's got to be in the place where Yahweh chooses to put his name. It doesn't say Jerusalem. It just says the place where Yahweh chooses to put his name, which we understand later on he did choose Jerusalem. But you shall eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread with it, that is, the bread of affliction. For you came out of the land of Egypt in haste. They call this the bread of affliction, this unleavened bread. That you may remember the day which you came out of the land of Mitzrayim, Egypt, all the days of your life, and no leaven shall be seen among you. In all your territory, this is the one, not just your houses, but all your territory, for 7 days, nor shall any of the meat which you sacrifice the first day between the evenings remain overnight until morning. And it says, you shall eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Repeating that verse again. Verse 5. down here at the bottom, you may not sacrifice the Passover within any of your gates which Yahweh your Elohim gives you. Not allowed to. But at the place where Yahweh your Elohim chooses to make his name abide, there you shall sacrifice the Passover between the evenings, going down the sun at the time you came out of Egypt. You shall roast and eat it in the place which Yahweh chooses. In the morning you shall turn and go to your tents. So after this Exodus 12, this Exodus observance that they were doing in Egypt, that is what they had to do from that point on. They had to go to the place where Yahweh chose to put his name. And the way they would do it, Josiah was a king who they had just discovered the book of the law, and through their examination of the book of the law, this is how he observed Passover. In 2 Chronicles 35:10. It says, "So the service was prepared, and the priests stood in their places, and the Levites in their divisions, according to the king's command, and they slaughtered the Passover offerings." They slaughtered the Passover, and the priest sprinkled with their hands. I mean, they sprinkled the altar. On the altar, they sprinkled the blood, while the Levites skinned the animals. And so the priests, post-Deuteronomy, post-Exodus, it was the job of the priest to sprinkle the blood of the Passover. That's how Josiah, they just found the book of the law. When they looked at it, that's what they did. And it says later on they did it exactly according to the ordinances of the Passover. So they were doing it correctly. And so my question for those who believe that, okay, we can take the Passover lamb, and we can take the blood, and we can sprinkle on the doorposts, that was something done one time, while the firstborn were the priests. But later on, when Yahweh chose Aaron, we chose the sons of Aaron. At that time, they were the ones that handled the blood, and they sprinkled the blood on the altar. And so the only way to keep a Passover with a literal lamb is there has to be a temple existing, and the Levites would sprinkle the blood. That's the way it was done after Exodus 12, from what I can gather, looking here at the scriptures. And so that's another problem you're going to have, because where are you going to put the blood now? We read Josiah's Passover, which was, according to that scripture, was correct. Now, can we go anywhere? Can we keep the Passover with Messiah being our Passover outside Jerusalem? Can we keep it somewhere else? Well, according to Messiah, he's talking to the Samaritan woman. In John 4:19, the woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say in Jerusalem is a place where one ought to worship." Yeshua said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship him. Elohim is spirit. Those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." All right. So the issue is no longer where. The issue is how. And the reason why I felt he could say this, because the place where he chooses to put his name has been expanded. Matthew 18:20, he said, "Wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there in the midst of them." His presence is not just in Jerusalem. His presence is in us, with us, among us, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered. And he has his name, the Father's name, written on our foreheads. Revelation 14:1. And so that's where his name abides, wherever his people are gathered. And it's for that reason I don't feel the need to go by a Jerusalem sighting of a new moon. It's wherever we are. That's where he chooses to put his name. Now, when the Messiah returns, that's where all the festivals will be held. Of course, at that time, we will still be doing a local sighting. It'll be in Jerusalem, because we'll all be transported there by the Spirit or whatever. And when I look at what the early disciples were doing, were they all going to Jerusalem during the festivals? Doesn't look like they were. It says in Acts chapter 20, verse 6, it says, "We sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread." So where were they during the festival of Passover and unleavened bread? They were in Philippi. They had to wait until the festival was over, and then they left, because they were keeping the festival there. So they must have seen what I'm seeing, I would think, that they didn't have to go to Jerusalem in order to celebrate Passover. But they could do it wherever they were, because wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, Yahshua is with us. There's no mention of him traveling to Jerusalem, even if they were too far away. Maybe a month later, someone might say, well, maybe a month later he went ahead and traveled to Jerusalem. Well, did you know that Philippi is 1,000 miles as the crow flies? It's 1,000 miles from Jerusalem. It would take you 50 days to walk there. I don't know if you get there any faster in a boat or not, but there's no way he could have made it. So, and if you look at the subsequent chapters, he wasn't going to, and so there's no mention of that. Imagine going from New York City to St. Louis by foot. That's quite a long journey. They couldn't make it in 1 month. Anyway, another example here we do see in Acts 20, verse 18, verse 20, they asked him, the Ephesians asked him to stay a longer time with them. He did not consent, but took leave of them, saying, I must by all means keep this coming feast in Jerusalem, but I will return again to you, Elohim willing. Well, why aren't they going with him? So they didn't see the need to run to Jerusalem for the festivals either, apparently. So they, from what I can gather, the early disciples felt that the place where he put his name was wherever they were. And it makes perfect sense in light of what Yahshua said in John 4. And that's why, when I look up in the sky and I see a crescent, I don't wait for Jerusalem. I'm not keeping the feast there. Now, if I was, then I would. But I'm here. This is where I'm at. And, okay, I beat that horse. So, anyway, continuing on here. So, we can still keep Yahweh's Passover whether we are clean or unclean in the physical sense, because we're not partaking of a physical lamb, which would require us to go to a physical temple that we might potentially defile. Okay, so, but Yahshua expects us to observe this, and he said to do this in remembrance of him. So this is a memorial of the Messiah's death on the tree. Now, on the night that he was betrayed, it says before the Feast of Passover. Now, I know it says before the Feast of Passover, but the term Passover and unleavened bread, first day of unleavened bread, are used interchangeably throughout the New Testament, especially. And so I don't think that this is really, this is on Passover day, but it's before they actually partook of the emblems or partook of the actual Passover lamb. It says, when Yahshua knew that his hour had come, he should depart from this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And supper being ended, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Yahshua, knowing the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from Elohim and was going to Elohim. Again, I want to point out about Passover before we go on to the next verse. It says, they led Yahshua from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early morning, but they themselves did not go into praetorium, lest they should be defiled. So this is after Yahshua was betrayed. lest they should be defiled, that they might eat the Passover. Pilate then went out to them and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? So this is the time the priests had not yet eaten the Passover. And of course they had charged the temple service. They would decide when Passover lambs would be offered. And they had not yet offered the Passover lamb, which is one of those indications that, we don't partake of it that night. Anyway, all right, going back to John 3. Yahushua, knowing the Father had given all things into his hands, he had come from Elohim, was going to Elohim, rose from supper, and laid aside his garments, took a towel, and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So this night that he was betrayed, he began to wash the disciples' feet. He came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Master, are you washing my feet? Yahushua answered and said to him, what I'm doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. Yahushua answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Master, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Yahushua said to him, he who is bathed need only wash his feet, but is completely clean, and you are clean, but not all of you. So Judas had not yet betrayed him. For he knew he would betray him, therefore he said, you are not all clean. So when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and master, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your master and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. So Yahushua gave us an example of what we should do to one another. Washing one another's feet. And so the very night he chose to do this was the same night he told them to partake of the fruit of the bread and the fruit of the vine in remembrance of him. That's the same night he was betrayed. And he gave us this example. I've given you an example that you should do as I've done to you. Most assuredly I say to you, a servant's not greater than his master, nor is he who sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. When do we do this? The best that I can gather, looking at the scriptures, would be the same night that we observe Pesach, or Passover. We partake of the body and blood of Messiah, but we want to enter into that service with a heart of humility, a heart where we examine ourselves. And so, in light of that, when we wash another person's feet, prior to partaking of the body and blood of Messiah, it's a humbling act. And it has a way of getting us into the right frame of mind, which Yahushua repeated over and over again, how we need to be servants. And our act of service toward man is an act of service toward Yahweh. And so in light of the fact that we don't want to partake of the drink or the cup, the bread or the cup in an unworthy manner, I feel that this is the appropriate time to do the foot washing. And so that's what we do as part of our Passover service. And the other thing we need to do as part of our Passover service is partake of the cup. Here in Matthew 26:27, it says he took the cup, he gave thanks, gave it to them, and said, drink from it, all of you. So we need to give thanks before we partake of the cup. And that's part of our thing that we do after the foot washing service. But once again, you want to bring all of this together. I have a website page, EliYah.com/PassoverService.html, and it's linked from the main page of the site, where you can download, you can print a Passover service that, to the best of my understanding, is exactly according to the Passover service that they were doing, with the understanding that Messiah Yahshua is our Passover lamb. And on that same page, I also have a video which you can watch, and you can follow along and actually do a Passover service, and I'll lead you through a Passover service according to that particular page in that study. And you can just pause it whenever you're doing different things. And so if this is all new to you, or even if you just want, some kind of thing to lead you along, that's available to you. You can download it as a Windows media file. You just right-click the file and choose Save Link As, and you can download that particular video. And so everyone should at least know how to do a Passover service. And I even have one for those on dial-up. I have a lower quality video you can still download and watch. That's a reasonable file size. So, all right, we must examine ourselves before partaking of Messiah. We must eat the regular meal before partaking of Messiah. The bread must be unleavened. The bread represents the Word, the fruit of the vine, representing the Messiah's sacrifice. We partake of it with bitter herbs, which I understand biblically to be myrrh, not horseradish and parsley. And we eat it in haste, letting none remain till morning. So we get rid of it. After we've eaten it, dispose of it, burn it, whatever. Eat it with the belt on our waist, sandals on our feet, staff in hand. We give thanks for the bread, Messiah. Of course, we also give thanks for the body, for the blood, the fruit of the vine. Don't slice it ahead of time. Break it after the prayer. Distribute it. Cease from work on the first and seventh days of the feast. Eat no leavened bread during those 7 days of the feast, which we already explained. It says no leavening is to be in our dwelling places or in our territories, according to Deuteronomy chapter 16. And so we give thanks for the cup, we drink from it, we wash one another's feet in preparation for the examining of ourselves in our service to Yahweh and His people. We do this prior to partaking of the Messiah. And so those are some of the major tenets, the major principles for observing the Passover service in a manner in which is congruent with both Old Covenant and New Covenant understanding. I don't believe Yahweh's word is divided against itself. I believe it comes together as one sweet, unified word of truth. I don't think we have to break away from the Old Testament and start some new religion. What Messiah came to do was not start a new religion. He came to reform and restore the original one that Yahweh originally inspired. But in the absence of a temple and the presence of the Messiah being our Passover lamb, we can still observe the Passover sacrifice unto Yahweh, which was offered in the place that Yahweh chose to put His name, and we can rejoice in that. And so in the coming weeks, we need to make spiritual preparations. We need to examine ourselves and be ready and take it seriously. And you can't sit on the fence, as we shared last week. You're either with Him. If you're not with Him, you're against Him. You're not on the sidelines. And so, brothers and sisters, I encourage you, take a look at the Passover service page if you're wanting to look at how to bring this all together. And if you're just watching this video and this is the first one, you haven't seen the other two videos, they will be on the website. I actually made a mistake last week and accidentally did not include last week's study on the transcript archive page. I put the Yahweh's calendar study in with the wrong into last week's broadcast video. So I'll be getting that fixed today. But I want to get these up here, these videos, hopefully by the end of today. And so if you missed a few, you can go back and take a look at those. And hopefully we'll give you some instruction and some help on how to do this. And it's exciting. It's an awesome thing. It's an awesome thing to behold the awesome ways that Yahweh, in the same way He preserved and brought Israel out, He is bringing us out of the world, and we are now being tested, and we are being tried, and we are being refined, and we're going through the fiery trial, which is to try us, as Messiah was brought through the fire, and as a Passover lamb was roasted in the fire. And the ultimate example of that being a reality was when He was killed on the stake, which we understood was a pole. And of course the Passover offering was attached to a pole, and it was roasted that way. In the same way, we go through our fiery trials as we take up our stake and follow Him. We are impaled, we are crucified with Messiah. It is no longer we who live. It is the Messiah who lives in us, in Galatians 2:20. So with these things in mind, brothers and sisters, doesn't Passover, that Old Testament ceremonial law, as some would call it, have so much to teach us about our walk, so much to teach us about the Savior that we love? It's for that reason I encourage us. Let's partake of Messiah, our Passover. And as you do so, my brothers and sisters, may Yahweh bless you, and may Yahweh have mercy on us all.